Welcome to 50/50 Books, the book review podcast where the books are split in two, and figuring out just what is going on is always a toss-up. I'm Taylor.
And I'm Jonathan. This episode we're finishing Beyond the Black Door by A.M. Strickland.
Just quick little disclaimers, I guess. One, we've said this one before, all the respect to the author for writing this book. It's a difficult job. If we're speaking on general vibes first, I was not the biggest fan of this book. So I'm probably going to have a lot to say that isn't exceedingly positive. But obviously, we're being very critical a lot of the times. So I don't want that to come across as very hateful. It's not the same thing. So there's that disclaimer. And then also something that happens in this book is the character of Nika, who we talked about in the first part, does basically come out, kind of. They're still referred to as Nika and uses she, her throughout most of this book, but at the very end, he changes his name to Kihan and seems to go by he, him. So we're just going to refer to that character as Kihan throughout this entire episode. We weren't sure what to do in that situation, but it kind of, there at least was a very clear, decisive coming out point for that character, which makes it easier for us. So yeah, that's how that's going to go.
The name was at least clear. The pronouns were only referred to by Kamai. We never get an interaction with Kihan again, but yeah, we figure that's enough.
Yeah. So getting into it, we do have this this is not going to be like very chronological at all, to be honest. So sorry. But at some point, we get Kamai kind of going through this moon chart thing, and it does help her kind of come to terms with like her asexuality. It's not given that terminology, but that's fine. We are in a fantasy universe. But it's like her not being sexually attracted to people. It's called being a new soul. And I don't know the sexuality of this author. I don't really need to know too much, to be honest. If they are ace and this is how they want to do that, that's fine. Me as an ace person, speaking just for myself, I guess, the term new soul was kind of off-putting for me, just because, like, it feels a bit infantilizing, if that makes sense. Like, oh, you're not sexually attracted to someone because you have a baby soul, is basically the vibe I was getting. I don't think that was the intent, but, like, I don't know. There is that perception of like ace people being very naive, and that's kind of how this came across. It's also kind of how Kamai comes across as well, but I mostly blame her mother for that, to be honest, by not telling her anything.
Yeah. She's also relatively young, at least.
Yeah, she's still only 18. I think it's perfectly fine that she doesn't know what's going on. Although apparently she's like being trained by all these pleasure artists, so I'm like, what's happening here? But regardless, the term of new soul was just kind of grating to me, but like I am one ace person amongst many, so you know, whatever.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think Kihan is also referred to with this, right?
I think so, yeah, because like Kihan has a moment where he's like, there's nothing wrong with us, and then Kamai's like us. So yeah, I guess both of them.
I couldn't remember if he had like pointed to the right thing, you know, to be called that on the chart or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then I guess, yeah, because I've been looking throughout, you know, we talked a little bit about why is it that Kihan is so invested in Kamai, and trying to find what is the connection that Kihan might have found early enough on. Maybe there was some sense of like matchup here that he had gotten early in the story that we didn't see, but there's at least some connection between the two characters finally, you know.
We took it as like female supporting females in the first part of this, like that kind of supplied their relationship. I think asexuals supporting asexuals, it's the same thing. Like that does not create, it can help like create a bond, but I don't think it's anything more than a possible basis. Their almost like dependence on each other throughout this book is just not very well done in my mind. But also I think that's every relationship in this book, so
yeah. I do think the sort of, I don't know, status, I guess, of calling them new souls, I wonder if that was intended to kind of more like make those characters feel lifted up, as opposed, you know, I'm just trying to figure out, I think the language is maybe weird to say new soul based on what you're saying, but I wonder if I don't know, I wonder if the author came up with a certain phrase that gets capital letters and stuff, so that way at least the kids who would be reading this, because this is a YA book, right? Like, I think it's so that way maybe the kids who would be reading this would be like, look, it's so important in this universe that it gets a special name, you know?
Yeah, I think it's supposed to reflect like the new moon and like the full moon because it is like a moon chart. So it's, I think like placement wise on the chart, you're, if I'm remembering correctly, I might be remembering wrong, but you're near the new moon side of things,
I
like
think
that
that's right.
absence of a feeling.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That does make sense. I don't think it's the best idea.
Yeah, you're allowed to not love it. Yeah. I did think it was interesting, especially again, like coming at this from the, this is a YA angle. So when I was training to be a teacher way back when, they showed us a few examples of, I guess you can consider them a worksheet, but like kind of these graphics to help kids understand a bit more what gender and sexuality spectrums are. And they went by a few different names. One was the gender unicorn, one was the genderbread person, whatever, whatever the image was. But it would usually come with like, yeah, like all these kind of, I don't know, they look like progress bars, right? Where like one end of the spectrum is on one end and one, the other end is on the other end. That's kind of what this felt like to me. It almost felt like using that, like implementing that teaching tool into as an element of this story to say like, why don't we like actually put a spectrum, like a visual spectrum in front of us and see where we might land here and like kind of give kids some language to think about something that they might not have had words to describe before. So I thought it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I definitely thought it was an interesting image and like very understandable because it is a spectrum, right? Like even being ace itself is a spectrum. Like it's not all the same, which is also kind of brought up. I will say like the gender spectrum of it is, this might just be a fault of Kamai, but it is interesting that like the first time it's mentioned, like how masculine do you feel within this? Like she's like, I can't be any masculine. I am a woman. Like it's like so foreign to her because like physically she is a woman and so she can't comprehend it, like gender being different than that. And I don't know, just the way the society is set up and even kind of reinforced throughout this book, there does seem to be a very clear divide in like how men act and how women act, even if it is on a gender aspect, because like Kihan is a man, right? And he's acting in very masculine ways as we are shown and like as is reinforced throughout this book. So it's like, it's interesting they have this tool to use, but it seems like gender is so split. Like there's nobody non-binary chilling in this palace.
Right.
Like I'm not sure if I believe it.
It's important to point out that Kihan still feels embarrassed about it when he realizes what this means for him, right? Like this is like I don't want people to know, like this is so embarrassing, like don't tell anybody. And that doesn't signify a world where this is super accepted, right? So even if they have the language for it, even if it's a part of the religion, somehow it's managed to make its way into still being like an oppressed minority group, right?
Yeah, but I don't know if it really is because Lenara can deem Kihan a man through his soul, and he would then be able to become a palace guard. Like that is enough to be like accepted by the kingdom, right? Like that is a transition that is being accepted as fact within your soul.
Yeah.
So it's from my understanding, Kihan's almost rejection of it was he felt almost like he had an advantage because he was trans, basically, right? And his mother should have been a palace guard, but she wasn't because she was a woman. So it's not fair that he can just claim he's a man and then get the position she wanted. That's how I kind of took that embarrassment. Like, but I don't think that was well done either. Because I'm it's just like, what are you planning to do with that, right? Like, are you going to change the system? How are you planning to change the system? Or are you just going to live a falsehood your entire life? Like, that just wasn't developed in any way.
Yeah, I think the fact that it feels a little wishy-washy is the problem because I interpreted it that way too. Like, look, they get legal status, right? Like legal acknowledgement that is what they are. But I couldn't balance that with Kihan's reaction. I was like, it doesn't make sense to me that it would be so protected and that they wouldn't at least acknowledge that part. Whatever, I get that it's like, well, I don't want to get advantage that's not mine. I still care a lot about like women's rights, basically. But to not be like, yeah, but like I am that and that's okay, that feels a little different.
Yeah, I can understand what you mean. It just, it doesn't make sense that it feels different.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I guess it is at least nice that it's, for the most part, accepted, even if Kamai has, like, no clue what's going on.
I think it's just, I guess this world kind of sits between like the state of our world and like idealism, right? Like I feel like it's trying in some ways to reflect the world we live in so that way, people who read it see themselves in it, and then in other
Mm-hmm.
ways it's trying to be more advanced almost, like more ahead on those sorts of things, and they have more language for it. It's more talked about. I don't know. I think that not exactly knowing where in between our world and a true fantasy world this sits is part of the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I also feel like this is recent enough where it could just be, like, openly accepted without embarrassment, right? And it would be fine. Like, trans characters could just be walking around normally. And
Yeah.
it would, that, I feel like that is also very impactful.
I mean, there's tons of like sexually fluid characters walking
For
around.
sure. That's, like,
So,
not a non-issue times 100.
right. I also do think it's like it was silly at the end for them to be like, yeah, and Kihan's like actually gonna become a royal guard so that way he can protect me. And it's like, wow, you guys changed nothing after all that.
I know. Also, not really either, though. Like, Kihan, does, like, transition, whatever. But the plan is for, like, him and Kamai to still go off and travel. So it's like he's not at the palace at all.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's how they write it off, and like that's why Kihan's okay with it. But I thought the whole like Kihan made like a lot of strong points about not
Mm-hmm.
wanting to do that. So I thought that there'd at least be like, hey, like Razim is the king now, and he's like we're kind of in with him now, so maybe we can get him to change this. Like there was none of that.
Yeah.
Felt insufficient. I don't know. But we can bring it back to Kamai a bit.
Yes, let's focus back to Kamai. I think one of my main issues with Kamai is so much of this book, maybe until, like, the last 60 pages, I don't know, she doesn't really do anything. Like, she doesn't
Mhm.
really choose anything. She's not active in the story in much of a way at all.
I mean, yeah, we talked in the last episode about her not ever like defending herself or actually getting what she's seeking.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that maintained itself for not the entire story, but just about. Like she's still getting information from Vihi and as he sees fit. Also doing a decent amount of withholding information, which doesn't help her cause. So
Right. It's like, I think part of it is just an issue with pacing. Like, some of the things she's doing could make sense, but, like, she has this game she sets up with Vaheen, which it kind of doesn't matter, to be honest. I don't
I
understand
agree.
the purpose of the game to kind of motivate her to solve what's going on. It's like you wanted to solve it anyway. If anything, you're only putting yourself at risk if you fail. So I don't see the
Yeah.
point.
It felt a little egotistical, right? To be like, oh, like let me put some stakes on it, which is just crazy because she hadn't really seen any success before she made that.
Right. And, like, also part of the problem is it doesn't make sense for Vaheen's character either, right? His character is strange. He makes this deal obviously because of arrogance, but then also constantly helps her and basically helps her solve it and gives her way too much power, to be
Hmm.
completely honest. Like, it
It's
doesn't make
unearned
sense.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, and I that's why I think it's kind of silly that she can be like, I won the game, like I have the information now, when he's done that for her, right? And he's kind of given her all of the stepping stones she needed, even told her some information directly. How can she be like, well, like I know it now? Not to mention like all of the guessing that she does, like when she's having that one conversation, she's like, I guess I was wrong again. It's like that should have just nullified it right there.
If it had been, if you can stop my plan, you win. Like, something very much more concrete would
Concrete.
have been
Hmm.
better. But I think they try and use it as a way to, like, let her have power over him at the end of the
Yeah,
book because of their sacred vow. But I don't think it was necessary.
it's her level up condition.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think it was necessary because I think if you're trying to play into this idea that he does actually love her in some way, then he could just love her enough to not kill her at the end of the book. Like, there are other things you could do besides a sacred vow. Or you could even do some kind of other divine intervention, because guess what? We don't see any fucking divine intervention in this book.
Yeah. It was a little, it made him a little less compelling because you would think the point of a character like this is that he's got the edge cases covered, right? So I don't see like why he would ever have made a version of this where Kamai could win reasonably, like where he couldn't argue his own way out of winning, out of her winning.
Right, and he does do that a little bit when he tells her the information, he's like, you didn't win because I told you, and you don't even know everything that's going on. There's a little bit of that like wordplay, but yeah, neither of these characters are like clever enough for this game between them to be interesting, which I think it was supposed to be the point, but like I think it would have been more interesting if they started this game sooner, especially for Kamai's character, because she basically begins this game and is like, I am going to use his obsession with me to win this game. And that's an interesting thought process to have, right? And it's a little bit dark, but like it's justifiable because he's evil, right?
Mm-hmm. No, to me, like, that was a compelling thought, right? Like, I was like, oh yes, like, this is where you take it, you know?
Yeah, and then like 2 pages after that, she's like, but I love him. And I'm like, these two things cannot happen together. Like, this is the pacing I'm talking about. This could have been stretched throughout the entire book. It would have made Kamai a lot more active, and it would have made their relationship kind of fall into a little bit of like the fake relationship trope, like where they're pretending and then they develop real feelings. Oh my god. But instead that's not the case. That's not the case.
I think it's interesting you bring up the pacing aspect, because if I look at just like the amount of information we get about the many, I don't know, the scenarios happening that are developing, you know, whether between them two or like with the king situation, I feel like the information flow was fine. Like, I actually don't think at least until the end of the book, things didn't feel too fast or too slow. It's the relationship pacing that doesn't match the information flow, and I think that's why we get a lot of telling. There's not actually moments where, I don't know, the author didn't create specific moments for those things to come out, and instead, you know, used Vaheen to do that, which I guess is fine, but it wasn't as exciting as I think if there were certain events that led to that information coming out, if Kamai had taken that more active role.
Something I like noticed while I was reading this is, and I think I kind of cracked the case here, reading this felt like watching a movie, right? It felt like very distinct scenes. And some very opulent scenes as well, like the ballroom dancing and the giant fortress of darkness. Like, it felt very like cinematic, but there just wasn't enough depth connecting those scenes together. Like, even the relationship between Vaheen and Kamai, I think I had in my notes, it felt like a training arc relationship, like where he's just teaching her things, and it felt like singular scenes instead of like the developing of a relationship.
I totally agree.
Yeah, it kind of caused that weirdness with the pacing, because we are getting a lot of information, and we're getting a lot of scenes where information is being told to us, which makes sense if it was a movie. Although it would still be kind of not great, all the telling rather than showing, but it would, you know, be more understandable. But this is a book, and we're in Kamai's head. And so we should have a lot more insight into like what she's thinking and like how relationships are kind of progressing with her. Because there's a lot of relationships she has in this book, but none of them are really developed at all, to be honest.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. There's one moment, and I wish I could remember the line, where I was reading some of the dialogue in the book, and I was like, feels like a script that I'm reading right now. And I forget what it was. There was something about the sentence itself where it didn't refer to, I wish I could remember the details. It didn't refer to something I feel like it should have referred to. And I was like, I feel like they would only do that in a movie. And not to mention also how in preparation for the last episode, I accidentally referred to this book as a movie in the notes.
Did you?
Yeah. There was one moment where I was like, let me change that real quick. So I think you're totally right. I also think it's a little bit of why I feel like the pacing until the end was okay, at least again on the information aspects, the pacing felt right until the end, where like maybe again like the last 40 to 60 pages I was like, this is so much happening and so much information, and it's very dense, and it made me feel like the book could have been longer.
Yeah, it definitely felt like the end climax, like action sequence. Like, she needs to get to a place in time. She's figuring out like connecting those final dots. She's not connecting anything, she's being told everything, but whatever. The scene would play out as if she was like connecting everything and needing to like run away from guards and like sneak through the palace, and like she's fighting people now, and like all of these things. It's like very high action, high pace, which I think, again, the movie thing.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of exciting, but I did feel like too much. I didn't get everything I wanted to out of it.
Yeah, it's just also because like a lot of the information she's learning could have been stretched out more. Like,
Yeah.
there's no reason for her to learn all of this at the very end.
It's funny because some of those scenes I think we only get because of another aspect I think that feels a little artificial, which is like Kamai withholds a lot of information that would be helpful and relevant to the people around her, like Lenara. So like she doesn't really tell her, she doesn't tell her about Vaheen until she does that run through the in-between, when that could have come out sooner, and like Lenara probably would have known what to do a lot sooner. Like she decided that she was going to take things into her own hands, and it didn't matter because she didn't do anything by herself. Like she needed to tell people in order for it to get solved. And I think it comes back to, in general, like her inability to invest in the relationships with the people around her. But I don't know, it didn't feel like a good part of the story that it was only certain things were only happening, or in contrast to what I just said, things were only lasting so long because Kamai was not saying things that she should have said that would have made sense for her to say.
Sometimes I also think it's like a matter of convenience that she's not telling people things because she happens to not see them. I just like remember she's trying to find Razim and she can't find him for days.
Yeah,
just
for days,
because,
yeah.
right? And it's like part of it is her own doing, but then part of it is also just like convenience of the plot, right? So
if I believed that she should have done that more with the context of the story, maybe it'd be okay, but I wasn't compelled to believe that it made sense for her to decide that as a character. Like, I don't know, when finally given tools to succeed, to fully ignore them. I don't know. Like, the only way she's been getting anything is by other people, so.
right. And I think it's because like she doesn't have any doubts really about Lenara and even Zaniri. Like, she seems to trust them quite a bit. And so
Yeah.
it seems like the only reason she's not telling them is because she selfishly doesn't want to tell them, right? Which is fine if that's the reason. But like, there's a part of that where she needs to accept that fault in herself, but she like never really thinks about it that way.
Yeah. I guess I would believe it more if the author talked about it more. That's all.
Yeah.
Like more of that, I don't know, that tug, that internal tug.
Yeah. We don't get much, I feel like, internal tugs from Kamai. The only point is like if Vaheen actually loves her or not, but that's like, I don't know. That's not really like well gone into. I don't know.
Yeah.
So part of the issue with like her sometimes doubting Vaheen, whatever, it doesn't matter, is she constantly will just go back and ask him for help all the time. I don't think there's a single problem she has in this book where she doesn't ask him for help. Even when he is the one...
When he's the problem.
Yeah, even when he or Darkness is the problem, she's still asking him for help. It's kind of crazy. But
yeah, it goes back to the begging and pleading I talked about last episode. Like, why are you doing this?
Yeah. It just also, again, is another one of those pacing things where it's such quick, like, turnaround. Like, she'll say, I can't stand you. I hate you. You're evil. And then, like, the next chapter, she's like, I need him to save me. And I'm like, girl, get a grip. Like, ugh.
Yeah. The one that drove me crazy, so, like, right after Vaheen runs her hand through Garish's heart, she's, like, super duper upset, which valid, very traumatizing, kind of a lot, probably didn't need to happen that way. All things that she acknowledged, by the way. And then she goes into the fortress and is like, Vaheen, what the fuck? And he's like, do you really feel bad about killing him? And she's like, wow, magically I don't feel bad about killing him. You're totally right. I love you. Like, I don't understand. Like, maybe it was meant to, like, complexify the relationship, put a little tug and pull, but it just totally made her, like, subservient to him all over again.
It's kind of her, like, lumping all of those negative feelings together. And just because he's like, you shouldn't feel that way, she's like, oh, I guess I shouldn't feel that way. But it's like, it's more nuanced than that. Like, you can feel like he went too far, and that's fine.
And, like, he still kind of subjected her to something, right? In the whole gore of it all, and, like, it's her body that was controlled to do that thing. And she seemed to make that distinction before getting to him, like, of being like, I am upset about what specifically happened, not necessarily who it happened to. And that just gets thrown out the door.
It kind of feels like it has to be a bit all or nothing with them. Like, if he does something bad, she either has to hate it or she has to love him, like, in spite of it. Like, there's no... I'm happy he saved me, but I wish he didn't do it this way. And then there's no follow through with that kind of decision, right? Like, she doesn't hold him to anything, which was stupid in the first part when she wanted an apology for a gift that was good. It's weird that idea never comes up again, because this you could get an apology for, but like, she doesn't ask.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we figure out this scene was like deliberate. He like planned it basically.
Right, because he like sent him after her.
So that he could save her, which is like, yeah, abusive. Don't do that.
It's not even the first time he's done that. There were moments in the first half of the book where he's like, I saved you. And she's like, you put me there.
Yeah. So it's like understood behavior. Do we have to look at that through a different lens, though, because he is not a human, right?
Maybe, but I just think it comes down to like she's convinced she's in love with him. And like, I'm not convinced that she's in love with him, but she's convinced that she's in love with him. And so I don't even know if she really has the love blinders up, or if she's just like, well, I'm in love with him, so I'm supposed to have the love blinders up, so I'm going to forgive him, you know? Like, if she feels like that's the right, like, if I'm in love with him, therefore this is true, so therefore this is true. But it's not that I'm in love with him. I just need to make sure that I can believe myself when I say that I'm in love with him. It's
okay if you just find him interesting, or like you like that he's powerful. Like.
She's just intrigued. Yeah.
Right. Like, that doesn't have to be love. But I think the issue is also kind of a, like, I don't think she actually understands what love is, especially because for so long she thought it would be, like, the same as desire, and now it's like, that's not the case. So she's like, oh, I'm interested in this person, and it's not sexually, so I must be in love with him. And I'm like, that's not the case. You haven't had a single conversation.
Right. I guess it comes back to kind of what you were saying earlier of Kamai is presented as a bit naive and unknowing because she's different in that way. I don't know. I guess it's in line with how she's been characterized, even if it's not sensical.
Yeah.
Another thing that bothers me about this relationship is, well, there's two things. One is I had this thought, and I didn't say it, and I should have in the last episode, that maybe Vaheen and Kamai are just kind of the same thing, like the same being, the same person. But I was like, I don't know, because like Kamai's like in love or whatever with Vaheen, and I don't know if she's a narcissist per se. Like, I don't know if that's what's being portrayed. But then it kind of was true, because like they're kind of just like, I don't know, Vaheen grew up with Kamai, grew up is not the way to put it, but he was there the whole time and like observing her whole life. So in some ways, and like he lives in her soul, so in some ways he is kind of part her. But I think worse than that is, I'm pretty sure Vaheen is kind of an adult that whole time. And he like even mentions something about like having a hand in shaping her. And then is like also gonna be in love with her once she's turned 18, basically, right? Like she just turned 18 and it's like, okay, now like I'm gonna like, you know, bring her in here, start making out with her, and just, I don't know, be generally weird about it. Like that is to me just grooming, right? Like I know he was not physically there with her, but he was literally in her head. I just don't even think it gets worse than that, honestly. like literally shaping her to end up in this position.
Well, I will say he does say, like, she's worried about that, right? He does say he changed her soul into what it became, the Dark Fortress, before it would impact who she was as a person. Maren did the same thing. When Maren locked away Vaheen and closed the door, she did that before it would impact who Kamai would become. Because they were young enough where, like, you hadn't fully developed a soul, you hadn't fully developed as a person. That's why he was put inside of her so put inside of her so early, is because she wouldn't have had like a fully developed soul yet, and so that would be easier to take over. So I don't think he influenced her necessarily, but he does say weird things like "my child, my bride, my soul," which is a little weird.
Oh my god.
That's verbatim, by the way.
Yeah, that's actually where I was like, it's unquestionable at this point, you know? And also, not to mention the like, Vaheen potential, like, she mentions how Razim doesn't really look at her with those eyes anymore. And is like, oh, that was probably just Vaheen's influence, which I'm like, if it was, still bad, still creepy. And if it wasn't, which I think it actually wasn't, still bad, still creepy, just for Razim instead.
Yeah, they did let Razim off the hook within this book.
I just don't think that Vaheen actually had influence over Razim until the door was open, right? Like, and even then, he only just starts to do it at the very end. Like, I don't see why he would have any amount of influence over Razim ahead of time.
The door was always kind of open. Like, there was always a connection between Kamai's soul and Razim's soul. So yeah, I think he can influence
Okay.
a little bit.
And he would influence that specifically, that Razim would
yeah.
have eyes for her. And then he'd also be all upset about it later on.
I mean, yeah, it's weird. I don't know. Like, it's a weird thing to include, to be honest. Especially because, like, another aspect to it of, like, them sharing a soul and kind of growing together is, like, I immediately thought of twins.
Mm.
So, like, it was another relationship where it was kind of like sibling dynamic. And I was like, first of all, another one. But it was weird because of that.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like with them being kind of, they're kind of overlapping people in a way, right? Like they're not totally distinct, even if they're not the same person. So that just makes it weird. That's all I have to say about that. I just don't like it.
I think because there isn't really a lot of nuance given to him as a character, like possibly being a little human, not being human, and like his interest in her, like there isn't much depth given to it. So it just seems weird, right? Like, I think if you wrote this from his perspective as somebody kind of placed in the middle of nowhere, experiencing the world basically through somebody else's eyes, kind of, or like being in part of this darkness that is innately evil, I don't know, like, but still falling in love with somebody, like that could be an interesting perspective to something. That's right?
True, yeah.
And we get the hint of something there at the end of this book when Kamai is like, just disconnect from the darkness, become your own entity.
Free yourself, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, that was an option. Like, I would have liked to see that throughout the entire book. Mm-hmm. But that, like, becoming human aspect of Vaheen, like, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But then there is, like, the weirdness, right? Like, of him just kind of being possessive, which would be fine because he's non-human. Like, we can understand that. But, like, yeah, being trapped in her soul bit, it might be too far.
Yeah, I think with that, there's kind of an implied distinction between the part of Vaheen that comes from darkness and the part of him that was created to be like a human.
Mm-hmm.
And there's never a moment where we can really trust that there is a part of him that is really human-like just because he presents that way. And that's even true at the end of the book when it's like he's trapped in there again and they're passing notes back and forth. Like, why would we believe anything he says about love or anything like that? It's still at that point in the story. Because he does seem upset when she stabs him and believable, but it's not really his priority or his intention to pursue that, really. Like, he has his own goals, right? Even if they didn't come from within. So I guess it's complicated. If there were going to be, I don't even know if I want to think about that. Like, yeah, like the separation out of human from the rest of him, like, I just don't think it would be the same him anyway. So I just don't think he has a distinct person.
Yeah, which is like a fault within the book, I think, because I think he could have had a distinct person. But that would also have meant Kamai had to have like an actual vulnerable conversation with him. But she's so like, for some odd reason, trusting him, but then also hating his guts. So it's like, right. They're never going to have an actual equal exchange about anything. Like, she has moments where they dream together and she's like, that felt real, right? And like, so we get hints of something. It's also weird because, like, I think Vaheen mentions he can't really see, like, out of Kamai's eyes or, like, experience the world exactly as she sees it until she opens the door. So I don't know what he was doing for 17 years. Like, I don't know how he was growing with her, because there were some glimpses he would get of her life. So it's that development of his personhood, non-existent in the book, but that potential development of personhood within the book. Like, I don't know how that is. I don't know. I just don't know how that is, right? And yeah. I guess it matches how I feel about the end of the book. Like, I don't understand how he can change when he is also just trapped within her soul.
Right.
Still, I guess, seeing the world through her in some aspects, but, like, is that enough to change as a person? Or as a being who has not had the chance to be a person? Like, no. So I'm just like, I'm kind of, I guess, disappointed in what was done to his character.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it could have had a lot going on. And I get he's kind of like a freak and like abusive and possessive and whatever, but like if you're gonna make darkness evil incarnate, which is what the author did in this book, then it's like, yeah, he's gonna be a little dark. I don't know what to tell you. But
Right.
there are ways he could have been made at least interesting.
So let me tell you why, if you want an alternate version of this story, you should watch the first season of the new DuckTales. Because
Oh my god.
there's a character in that first season who is basically synthesized from dark magic and is like created with the intention of kind of a kind of similar thing where like this dark power, it's a person instead of a being like this, but like this dark power wants to kind of take over the world sort of thing. And it kind of follows her trying to gain trust with the McDuck family and like get in where like it's important so that way she can take over in the way she needs to take over. But then she also kind of becomes her own person, even though she's not a literal duck, like she is magic incarnate, and like kind of follows her story of like developing into her own thing, fighting back against the dark magic that she's from and all that. So I think it's a much more like compelling version of this idea of, can something that's created from darkness become its own person?
Right, it's definitely an interesting concept. Or even just like, not necessarily darkness, but like, can something immortal and kind of detached from humanity become something more human as we would think of it, right? Like, have relations and a life, and yeah.
Yeah, there's like constant reference into the episodes of like, oh, like she can't bleed because she's not like really, I mean, she's a duck also, but like she's not really a person, you know? Like things like that where it's like she really is made from magic even like after all that stuff happens.
Like, those are interesting morality questions, right? Like, even just trying to define what it means to be human.
Yeah.
We try to write about that kind of stuff all the time. I think this book could have gone into that more.
Yeah.
But it's just like, disappointing, because it has the potential to get into all of those topics. But
I agree.
so, like, I guess the major thing that happens, how we spend most of our time, is Kamai ends up apprenticing under oh god, what's his name?
Zaniri?
Zaniri. I was going to throw a D in there for some reason. I know it was going to be wrong. Zaniri, who's a pleasure artist and also the brother of Lenara. So Kamai doesn't actually end up sleeping with anybody, but it does mean she gets to be in the palace and kind of figuring out, like, she needs to provide some value to the keepers, right, at this point. So her masquerading within the palace, trying to get close to Razim, that's kind of what she's doing right now. And then obviously Kian comes along with her, so.
They did scare me into thinking that the thing I excused this book from scaring me on in the first half was going to happen here. Kamai's like, oh, I'm going to have to grow up to like sleep with people because I need to follow in my mom's footsteps and she's a pleasure artist. And I was like, no, like don't let this book be like a complicated version of there's only one bed, you know? And then this part here when they kind of introduce this section, they're like, oh, Kamai, like you're gonna have to learn to sleep with people in order to get information. And she's like, oh my god, it's happening. And it was like, no, it's happening, like don't make this be the book. And then it wasn't that again. It's like, okay, I've been duped twice.
She is not only like uninterested, she is uncomfortable with the idea of sleeping with people. So yeah, I think it would have been absolutely horrendous for her to sleep with anyone.
That's why I was so scared.
Yeah, but thankfully Zaniri sets up the whole card game aspect where whoever beats her first will get to bed her, which is crazy. But honestly, it's kind of a fun setup. Like,
yeah, so while I think the setup is cool with like, you know, people having to battle Kamai at a game she seems to universally win at, I had a problem with the card game itself. And pretty early in the story they mention the game and they talk about how the tiebreaker is like a story thing, and I was like, okay, like that's kind of cool, but like it already feels like shaky ground for a card game. I'd be happy if they don't say more. Like, I would have been totally fine if they didn't explain like the rules of the card game. I don't necessarily expect my authors to come up with a book and a card game. That feels really hard and difficult. And I don't think it ended up landing well. Like I had a little bit of trouble fully understanding the gameplay, but it basically seemed like highest card wins. I don't know what order people played in or if it was at the same time. That part was a little confusing to me. And then, yeah, like the tiebreaker was like, okay, like the cards represent something. And so you just have to tell like a better story of why you think your card would beat the other one. Now, this doesn't make sense to me because there's like probably a pretty static number of times where this is going to happen, right? Like there's only, I don't know, if the cards count up to 10, let's say, I forget what it was, or 8, then there's only 8 ties that are possible. So you would think that there'd be like a pretty static set of stories available to use. I don't know. And I guess it's more than 8 ties because there's 4 suits, but whatever. I don't want to do the math on that. There's not a lot of them. So it feels like the game is broken. And I don't know why people wouldn't just use the same stories every time, or there wouldn't be really popular known stories that are really hard to beat. Or like you wouldn't just use the same ones. To me, it felt like a broken game. And I also don't know how someone could be so good at this game to win every time, because without knowing, I mean, maybe you can start learning how to guess what other people have in their hands, but at a certain point, you're just going to get a shitty hand. And she kind of says that when she plays against the king. Like, she can't even lose to the king reasonably because she's like, oh, my hand is shitty. Like, she can't win 100% of the games if shitty hands are possible. You have to lose sometimes. That's like how poker works. Like, the best people lose. So that's my rant over. Card game was not good.
Okay. I will say, I think they play at the same time. I think the
that's what I
thing is,
thought,
though, is Kamai is cheating while she's playing. This is not to say she only wins because she cheats, but within this instance, she's using, like, Vaheen's special gift to be able to get into their head. And I do think patterns are established. I think when she plays the king and they draw, she is about to go into a story that's familiar. Like, oh, my card wins because I think she has, like, one of the moon phases and he's playing a constellation. And she's going to say, like, Heshara as the moon has prominence over the constellations. Like, and that's an understood, like, way in which to win that draw. But he steps in first and is like, my constellation shoots at the moon, whatever that ends up being. But, like, yeah, I think there are definitely patterns.
Behavior would lead to a worldwide popular game like that. It seems like the rare occurrence in this. Like, the game, when I say it's broken, it means that it would be boring to play again and again.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. It's short-lived, but it's supposed to seem like it's very old, connected to this kingdom. I understand.
Yeah, I guess it, like, helps lean into the religion a bit more, like the myth of it all. But
yeah, I guess it is a good opportunity to go into that. It's also like we get some imagery. I think, first of all, that's where we learn about the constellations, I think, is during that game, or around that game at least, which is, like, interesting lore to know that they're, like, considered guards. Like, that's very thoughtful. And it's also where we get an image of, like, Ranta, one of her symbols being, like, the rose or whatever. And I was like, that's interesting. But that's when I was still, insane while I was reading this. So we don't have to talk about it.
Oh, it's all right. I was with you on that.
Yeah.
The only other thing about the card game section that I thought was kind of, that didn't land as well as I wanted it to, is it did feel like her ability to do the bit where she peeks into someone's brain while they're both awake and playing this game, because she's, I guess, close enough to them. It felt a little convenient. Like, there's this whole setup of the Soulwalkers and, like, needing to sleep near people in order to do that, or, like, maybe do some weird stuff behind the scenes with the in-between and all that. And I know this is, like, to bypass the in-between. It felt like a lot of setup to not use any of that.
For sure. I think Kamai goes from being a damsel to being a bit of a Mary Sue. I feel like Mary Sue is overused nowadays to just mean anybody who has, like, is a powerful woman, whatever. But in this case, like, yes, this is like, well, first of all, Vaheen didn't need to teach her about the in-between if he was just going to teach her this, right?
Right.
But then also, this is so absolutely overpowered because she can just kind of put people in a trance and then also put them to sleep, right?
Right.
Which means she doesn't have to sleep with anybody. It's understandable why he wouldn't want to teach her this. It's less understandable why he did.
Honestly.
But I guess we don't need to talk about that. But it's like, 100% overpowered. It kind of, I don't want to say ruins the rest of the book, but it kind of does, because it gives her all the answers she needs without actually putting in much thought or work.
Yeah, she never has to learn to put in the effort she hadn't been putting in.
Yeah. And she also does it, and when she's doing it on normal people, she's like, this is so boring. And I'm like, you wanted this to be your job. Like, this is what you wanted.
I mean, she just wanted it by default, right? Like, she didn't actually want anything.
Yeah. She does make one comment about, like, her traveling is, like, something she's always dreamed of doing. And I'm like, has it been? She mentions the atlases, and, like, she always likes the atlases in the beginning. And I was like, she's Ranta. And then actually, she just likes to travel. Crazy.
That's a good point. It's so funny because when you brought up the atlases last episode, I was like, man, I don't even remember when that happened.
Yeah, such a small scene.
Yeah, so and then for it to be like, yeah, I love to travel. Like, that's so funny.
Which is fine. I mean, sheltered life. She should get out and travel.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be good for her.
Yeah. But yeah, she gets this power and, like, everything kind of feels easy. We have, like, some time skipping going on.
Right, she's, like, unable to track Razim down.
And then she ends up getting trapped in her soul house by Vaheen. I mean, a lot of the Vaheen stuff we've already kind of covered, but I guess Kamai does discover the Dark Fortress is also her soul house. And because it's her soul house, she has some power over it, and she's able to discover this letter from her mother that had been hidden away, which kind of details, like, what happened.
I was kind of shocked that Marin put in a failsafe here, given how little information she gave.
I was also surprised, because this was seemingly done, I think at least this first letter was done when this house was locked up. So, like, 18 years ago. And she's like, hopefully I get to tell you face to face and, like, explain everything.
Right.
Kind of. Because then she's also like, I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to kill yourself. So I'm like, that's crazy. But it feels like she had 18 years to kind of plan what she was going to do. But at the beginning of this book, it did not feel like Marin had planned anything successfully.
No, not at all.
Why are you possibly training your daughter to be a pleasure artist to work with the Twilight Guild when you know they're evil? Like, I didn't understand that sequence of events.
I guess she must have just thought she was going to have more time, but I'm like, she's 18. Like, what more time?
Right.
Just knowing all the things she could have said at this point in time, it makes even less sense that she didn't say anything. It's also, like, pretty risky to leave this around, because Vaheen could have just found it and torn it up, you know? It seems like a better failsafe would have been to say something than leave a note in there, hoping that if she opens the door, enough things happen that she finds it. Because she also tells her not to play with things in soul houses. Maybe she would have done the same thing in there. Not, like, in that she wouldn't have touched anything.
Yeah, it's also, like, established that the timeline is just so weird. Because I think Marin mentions, like, she didn't have time to tell anybody else, like Lenara and stuff like that. But telling Lenara about the truth of, like, this protection, I don't know if that ever happened, but it should have, right? I think Marin and Kamai kind of do the same thing, where they just withhold information for no reason. And I like, don't understand why.
Yeah, you know what? She gets it from her mother. You're totally right. All of this withholding Kamai does, and like, oh, I'm all upset about it. It all comes back to the character I was upset at during the first episode, and that's Marin.
Right. And if the reading of this is supposed to be she didn't discover what Halan had done until 18 years later, where she basically dies, whatever. Okay, let's say that's true. Like, how... I'm just curious, like, how did she not figure it out sooner? Like, she was in the same house as Halan and seemingly in love with him and slept with him, which she lets her daughter know for some reason.
So weird.
So weird. So, like, how is she not discovering all of his secrets? Like, there is no... the timeline just doesn't make any sense. Because if it's the 18 years later she figures all of this out, why did she not sleuth through his head sooner? Because she loved him? Fuck that. Like, you think he's a Twilighter.
She didn't at first, yeah.
Right. Like, why would you trust anything? You should have known about who Razim was and what Halan had done and, like, all of this.
She at least knew Vaheen, right? So she should have been doing her research.
Right. It's just... yeah, and then she didn't tell anybody, and maybe she didn't meet up with Lenara in a way that they could exchange this information. For 18 years, that's crazy. But let's just say it's also not true, because we know Marin was traveling to the palace and Lenara would give her the go-ahead to get inside. Like,
right.
They had a connection. So it's just like such a weird... It's weird to deliver information in this way at the end of the book. It feels very cheap, but also the timeline of it all just... it doesn't make sense unless Marin very actively didn't say anything for 18 years, which is possible.
I think it's possible, yeah.
It's just like, it's so dumb. Like, but we complained about that in the first episode.
Yeah.
But it's done. Between the letters and, like, Vaheen and I guess also Lenara, because she ends up traveling the in-between to get to Lenara's place, we get the entire picture of what's going on, right? Like, and so Kamai is able to win her game. That, like, Vaheen is part of Darkness, and that, like, Darkness is planning to take over Razim's body. The original intent was that Vaheen would be placed in Razim, but Halan had stopped that. Not because he knew, but because he wanted to protect Razim.
But it's okay because Razim is still gonna throw a wrench in the whole world order.
Right. Just because. I mean, I guess he doesn't know, right? Like, your dad is part of a group and you follow through, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess it's just kind of crazy that he's like, this is the appropriate balanced response for the murder of my father. I don't know. It feels like a lot.
It is also weird, like, the Twilight Guild is letting you do all of this stuff so you can kill the king. Why? So your own revenge? Like, do they care about you that much? That seems weird, but it could work.
I think he's just a little naive, right? I think we talked about it in the first episode of like, he's kind of easy to manipulate. I think he's just kind of rash, right? Like, I think he doesn't think that deeply about things. And so, of course, he thinks this is reasonable. And like, I was thinking at some point during the story, I forget what happened, but I was like, man, like, there is a version of this story where Razim is the main character and he thinks it's a hero arc.
Yeah, which also could have been really interesting, especially if he's having these darker influences from Vaheen, like what that could have been like, and all of that nonsense. Because, yeah, it does make sense for him to just trust them, but if you use your brain for a second, like, it is kind of like this group that has existed long before me is letting me kill the king. That's a little weird, right? Like, why am I so important? And why are we killing the king? I guess is an important question. If it's just for revenge, like, that's pointless.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it doesn't feel like revenge. Yeah, like revenge and killing the king line up as the same thing. Like, I don't know. It doesn't seem to process for him that's not balanced. Like, it's not equal.
Yeah, I would have liked to see more of conversation between Razim and Kamai about that, right? Like, because obviously from her perspective, she's like, well, I don't know if she ever has this thought, but it would make sense for her to think about it this way of like, why are we killing the king for revenge? Like, you really think the Twilight Guild cares about that? Like, they must have some other plan going on. Like,
yeah,
that makes sense. And he's probably too wrapped up in it to see it. But if they had talked to each other at like any point within this book, then I don't know, something could have been done there.
Yeah, it's just also Razim puts no effort into understanding the full story, right? He just kind of takes what's given to him for what it is. So, and he's even surprised. He's like, I stabbed the king and now I'm learning that you're my dad. It's like, yeah, I mean, you didn't take like an ounce of effort to figure out what the whole story was. So,
yeah. I mean, it can fit. It can make sense, but...
No, I do think it makes sense because he's been characterized as such, but it's stupid.
Yeah, it's just another way the book could have kind of been a little bit deeper, been a little bit more interesting. But that would have involved a lot more of Razim being in the picture. He does become very background, even though he's the one kind of possibly destroying the world order, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he tries to do it. He tries to kill the king with his poison dagger, and in a kind of a way he does, but doesn't. Because Kamai is like, oh, I need to stop this from happening because this is a mess. It was. And this was the one time in this book I think I called something and it happened not immediately, but pretty shortly after, where I was like, yes. Which was, she was like, oh, if I kill Razim first before the king dies, it won't disrupt the world order, though that would be very scary because there's no heir at that point. But I understand the thinking, and I was like, oh, okay, I really thought she was going to just kill the king first, because she kills the king first, then Razim didn't kill him. Whatever, though, I can accept this. And then, like, she has a hard time with that, and it's like, wait, I should kill the king. And I was like, yes, you should. You should kill the king. Great idea.
Yeah, that was great. I actually didn't see that coming. I
yeah.
I mean, it was a slow-acting poison. I was like, are we going to save the king somehow? But also, Razim lets them have a full conversation before saying, oh, by the way, there's poison in that dagger.
I know.
So, but yeah, it was very cool. I mean, it's anher moment of trauma for Kamai.
Oh,
like,
yes.
he has to kill somebody.
To kill him.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So we save the day?
Yeah.
Question mark?
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, Razim kind of becomes king, but he seems good at it, I guess.
It's like day 2. Who knows?
It's day 2.
Yeah, there's some things from the end parts of the book. I mean, this is slightly before this, but we did see Marin just before the darkness is sealed away for good.
Ugh,
and I think it was supposed to just be emotional because, like, you know, she loves her mom. But I was just thankful to get an apology that was direct from Marin being like, I should have told you things sooner. Like, please, yes, you should have. This is all happening mostly because you didn't say something sooner. So whatever. I appreciated that happened.
I didn't appreciate how she told Kamai to tell Jeedris that she forgave him.
Yeah, that seems
I'm like, girl,
unnecessary,
he
huh?
sexually assaulted you.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to forgive his ass.
I guess she's just feeling like, I'm so glad I have a daughter or whatever, but
Ew.
yeah, I agree.
What an ew mentality. And I mean, okay, sure, forgive anybody you feel like forgiving, that's fine, but it felt like a weird... Deidris in general felt like such a weird inclusion in this book, both what he did
agree.
and just him in general, like, because we kind of get a hint at the end of like maybe Kamai forgiving him too, and maybe building some kind of relationship or something. I don't know.
Oh, I don't know about that much, but I do think she maybe forgave him. But
yeah, but just like her want to kind of have a relationship with him, I guess is the point, and that reciprocated by him, maybe, I don't know. That, like, why bring any of that up? Like, why have any of it? I just didn't understand. And I didn't feel the need for him to be forgiven for what he did if he wasn't going to be a character anyway. Like, who cares, you know?
It was weird of her to, like, even think about, oh, it's like, I really could have had a relationship with him. It's like, I mean, first of all, we talked in the first episode how she seemed to have no intentions of doing so. But it did seem like unnecessary. Like, why do you want a relationship with him? I guess because her mom forgave him, but I don't know. Like, she even says right in that moment, oh, he's only acknowledging me because I'm important now. Like, she still doesn't feel connected with him in any way. I guess it's going for, like, happy ending, right? It's like, oh, all is well, so I guess I can forgive him.
Yeah. I almost wanted to say it's because, like, that is her father, right? But, like, she also talks to Razim and is like, the king wasn't really, like, Halan was your father, right?
Yeah.
She understands. So, like, yeah, I don't understand this idea of Jeedris. It just was another point in this book that just did not need to even exist.
She just needed a place to go.
I think, though, like, Jeedris in general could have just been removed from the equation, right? If Kamai had been able to just go to Lenara to begin with, or Lenara had found Kamai and then set her up with Zaniri, we could have streamlined this whole book movement-wise and then spent more time diving into relationships.
Great point.
And then obviously we have the Kihan coming out stuff, which we kind of talked about already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the last thing I have on here is just the very first thing that they talk about with setting up the kingdom under Razim is that they had to kind of rewrite the story a little bit before making it public, and then they literally swear on that new story. It's like, you know what? We learned nothing throughout this whole book. If this is how we're starting the new era, like we're just gonna start everything on a lie, and nothing will change.
Yeah, I think it definitely plays into that idea of the keepers of like maintaining order kind of no matter what, right? Like, you're lying to everybody, but it's okay because you are maintaining this mythological order that we just assume exists. We don't actually know.
Right.
But...
although, maybe we can believe it more now that this has all happened with the darkness.
Yeah, I was kind of frustrated by that. Like, just because we do very clearly see darkness, and we know Ranta is missing, supposedly. She was just not around. So I was really hoping for more of like that mythology type of stuff to just be present. Also because Vaheen says like a very interesting line about the story everybody knows about Taheen and Heshara protecting Ranta and like all of that. That's the widely accepted story. But Vaheen mentions another way of the story could be Taheen using Ranta and like getting the constellations to be guards to basically keep Heshara with him, right? So the entire mythos becomes a lot more dark if that's the case, and also that idea Kihan had of Heshara being subservient is also reinforced by this version of the story, and I thought it was such an interesting thing to bring up. And then that's kind of all that happened with it,
right?
And it's not just Vaheen making shit up, because even Lenara is like, oh, that version isn't as accepted. Where did you hear that? Like, she's like, blasphemy, basically, is what this is. But if we're accepting that the stories people are believing aren't necessarily true, like, the Keepers might be reinforcing an idea of how the world is supposed to work that isn't true either. Like, who is to say if darkness breaks down the world order that things wouldn't be better, or that Ranta maybe doesn't even want to be married to the king? Like,
Right.
all of these things could be possibilities, and Vaheen brings up this possibility, but nothing is really done with it. And we don't really get any insight into what the gods might want. I thought we possibly could when I thought Kamai and Ranta were the same person, which held on for a little bit longer than I was expecting it to, because Vaheen, like, considers Kamai a superior being, and, like, the roses on the Ranta card, all of those things. I was like, oh my god, I'm putting the clues together. But no, I'm just a fool. But, I mean, no, we just kind of... The Keepers do whatever they need to do and kill whoever they need to kill to establish and keep established this order that we just kind of accept as is, and that we let that order influence how shitty it is to be a woman, basically.
Yeah, no, it's
Like-
it's interesting because at the end of the day, it's a little bit of a reminder, the way Lenara talks about that, or response to that this is still humans in charge of this. And it's just a set of humans who have decided what they think is right, putting that on the rest of the world.
Right. We, like, see no hint of any god or divine intervention. Like, we kind of have Marin as a spirit, but she's also been trapped there the whole time. We don't know if she's speaking for Hashara in any regard. We don't know if any of the priests or priestesses are speaking for Hashara in any regard.
Right.
We just kind of believe they are. And Lenara brings up this idea of, if you go against the vow for the Keepers, like, you don't want to anger a god. And I'm like, please do. I would like to see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we're saying these things, but we're not seeing the influence of gods anywhere. Like, even amongst the earth, we're not seeing what Ranta's gift might be like. Like, how is she making the earth better? How is she providing for people? Like, what is the purpose of that? Like, it's to keep out the darkness, right? But, like, why? Like, why? Like, I don't know. And the whole idea of Hashara and darkness being connected because of, like, the moon cycles and even just darkness of the sky, like, I thought that could have been an interesting thing, especially when I think it's Kamai. It would make sense for it to be Kamai. I think it's Kamai who says it's similar, the Temple of Hashara and, like, the temple basically that Vaheen has built inside Kamai's soul. They're very similar.
There's a lot
looking.
of parallels. They talk about the checker pattern on the ground, and I don't know, there's a lot of moments where it's like 1-to-1. They mention something in one and then the other.
Right, and so, like, that connection, along with what Vaheen knows of the story of Hashara, who might not even like Taheen as, like, the son, and just how all of that could have played out to kind of dismantle this idea of what was going on, which would have fit with how Kihan feels within society, and how women are treated in general. Just, I don't know. I guess, like, my biggest issue with this, which we've kind of talked about along with Vaheen as the characters, there's just so many more ways this book could have been deeper and way more nuanced, and I think it kind of tries to do that with its morality, but allowing darker morality because you might love a character isn't actually that interesting. This kind of stuff and, like, what you're willing to do to maintain an order that isn't necessarily good, on the words of gods, you don't hear. And, you know, darkness as not necessarily just evil for the sake of being evil, but, like, just all of these things that could have just been crazy interesting, especially because these are interesting mythologies being established here, like the constellations, the difference in Ranta and how she's being used, why she's being married to a human king, like, all of that is very interesting backstory, I think, but it's just, it's not very well used, I guess.
Yeah. I do wish it was a little... I wish everything in this book was more fleshed out.
Yeah, it's also, like, I think I made one comment about this, how Gedris was in the solar jobs, and Marin was obviously a keeper, so she's with Hashara, back when I thought Kamai and Ranta were the same person. But, like, this story of Hashara being trapped with Dain because of Ranta, like, is that not what Gedris tried to do? Like, it's the same thing. It's crazy we're seeing all of these parallels between Kamai and Ranta, and it's like we're just not talking about it. Like, why are we not talking about it?
I thought there was an interesting parallel with the whole, like, Hashara during the new moon, like, turning away and facing the darkness, kind of like the cheating situation of like talking about, even though it wasn't cheating in the end, but like the idea of like the queen consort going off and like producing a child with someone else and hiding it. I was like, oh, that feels like a parallel, even though that wasn't the real story. It feels like a parallel with the whole idea of like Hashara running off.
Right. I don't know. I also just think it's boring to say darkness is evil because it's darkness. I don't know. That's like,
there was an
so
opportunity
lame.
to be more complex than that.
Right, especially if you're having Vaheen kind of embody darkness, but like this is the first time darkness has gotten to kind of interact with humanity, right? And what's happened? It's fallen in love. And that is interesting to do with an immortal being. But oh well.
Yeah.
This was technically my review. Do I want to just give it? Are we at that point?
Yeah, we are at the point where we can give reviews. So
okay. So including that long rant, I think it's been very clear that I would have liked a little bit more depth, a little bit more nuance, a little bit more character, but that's also because I'm me. So because of the potential I saw, I think I'm going to go with 2 stars.
That's exactly what I expected you to give it.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. For me, I thought for the most part I enjoyed reading the book, but kind of similarly, there were many things that kind of felt just missing, and I do wish it was fleshed out some more. We talked about the kind of pacing imbalance where I did feel the information was being shared at the right pace, but the other aspects like the relationship between Kamai and Vaheen weren't there for me. I didn't find Vaheen as compelling as I had hoped. So yeah, I feel like there's a lot of things I wanted from the book that seemed like it could give me and it didn't. So with that, I kind of have started to think about the ratings where like something won't get 4 stars unless I feel like I would recommend it. And I think it's like I would recommend this to certain people. There's certain people who I think this would work for. I also don't think it's a bad book. Like, again, I had a good time, especially when things sped up. They did get really fast at the end, but I was definitely turning the pages fast there. I was into it for that moment. So with that, I think I'm going to give it a 3.5.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like I was really like, I came in thinking it would give it a 3, but I don't think that's right. I do think 3.5 is more appropriate because I didn't have a bad time. Not that I have to have a bad time for it to be a 3, but I needed to be a little closer than that to be a 3.
You need to be more miserable, is what you're saying.
Just at least a little more bored. There were definitely times in this book I felt a little bored, but for the most part, that's not the word I would use to describe it.
Yeah, I can understand that. Like, I was thinking a lot while I was reading it, but the issue with me was it wasn't necessarily for the best reasons. I don't know, just thinking about it too critically, I think.
In a way, I felt like this was a good sweet spot for conversation, though. Like, I think there's something about I love reading a good book on this podcast, especially because getting one that's up in the 4 and 5 stars can be difficult. But I think there's something kind of about this being more of a middling book, at least in my opinion, that like there's a lot of things to critique, but also like appreciate about it. So I thought it was a good balance.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's it for this book.
I mean, good vibes.
Oh, yes. How could I forget good vibes?
We're going to go with good vibes to close this one out because I feel like I've given too many thorns. Not the time. So I think my good vibe, I kind of basically said it already in full. So to keep it short, I did think the mythology was interesting. And just that like dissonance kind of between what is true and what people believe is true can be very different when you're dealing with religion. And I think we got a hint of that in this book. So I just thought that. And just how, like, the stars were explained and, other things kind of came together was all very interesting. It was good work done to kind of provide all of that backstory. It's good writing.
Yeah. I think it was probably smart of the author to keep it to a limited size, too. I think it could get... Something like this could have gotten carried away if it was, like, a lot of minor gods and stuff getting added in there, so... Yeah, I thought it was well categorized.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I think it's the fast-moving portions of the book. I've gone back and forth a couple times between being like, this part was rushed, but also exciting. But like, I would refer to both the parts where like she's running down the bottomless staircase and like being chased by Vaheen a little bit, as well as like her running through the in-between. Kind of both times that happens as being like, oh, like these are kind of tense, exciting parts, and I want to know what happens next. And I actually wouldn't have mind if the in-between got fleshed out a little bit more too, speaking of, because I just thought that was a cool design. And to mention that the clearing that she goes to exists within the in-between. Like there was a lot of cool connections with that. So I really liked those faster moving portions that kind of leaned into more of the fantasy portions of the book a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the in-between on its own could have been like a very interesting space.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because Lenara's like, people don't really do that, but that means that people do. Some people do.
Well, those spirits that were like trapped in that house had to come from somewhere.
Yeah, very interesting. But that's Beyond the Black Door, I guess.
Yeah.
Kind of a setup in a way for the month to come, which is Halloween.
Heck yeah. I was thinking about that with those faces too, and what we were just talking about with the mansion and the spirit thing. Like, that was kind of the horror part of this book, so that's a good lead into what we're going into.
Definitely. And do you want to intro what we're reading next?
Yeah, I can give it a go. So the next book we're reading is called Lone Women by Victor Laval. We'll be reading up to, but not including, chapter 36.
Is chapter 36 really halfway?
Yeah, it's got 68 chapters, I think. So I went to, 50% of the book, and then I forwarded it actually 2 chapters just because chapter 35 was in all italics, and it made me feel like it was important. So I kept it in the first half.
Okay.
This one, I guess it's a horror book primarily. It's got a slightly historical aspect. It's early 1900s. So the main character, Adelaide, her parents are killed, and it's referred to that Adelaide's secret sin is responsible for killing them. She flees off to Montana because the government has this program where people who are willing to tame a chunk of land can come get it for free. And she drags this trunk around with her wherever she goes. So she drags this trunk, including to Montana. We don't know much about the trunk, but the trunk might have a hand in helping her tame this new piece of land. So that is the general setup. Curious what this trunk could be and what it might have to do with the killing of her parents. I think there's going to be a lot of kind of mystery aspects to pick up on, even though it is a horror book primarily.
It's also Western, right? I mean, it's 1900s Manifest Destiny.
It is Manifest
era,
Destiny,
so
yeah.
Western. Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting.
The title, apparently this Lone Women title comes from like one of many women who went out to grab a new piece of land like this. Again, this is according to the book description. I don't know the historical aspect of this, but that's what the book description says, that she's one of many. And so I think that implies that we'll interact with some others as well.
Very interesting. I mean, another historical fiction?
Yeah,
Could
I
be
mean,
good,
scary. Scary because of my experience with historical fiction, but I think the fact that it's a horror is gonna keep me in either way.
Yep. So definitely fitting for our October read. And if you have your own thoughts and theories about Beyond the Black Door or this next book we're reading, Lone Women, obviously we have the Twitter, 5050_books, and we have the Goodreads and the YouTube, blah, 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 all in the description. I'd say for Lone Women, it is a horror book, so if you can find the trigger warnings for it, if that's something that is a worry for you, I would definitely do that, because horror is a little bit, it's always got something going on, which is a bit grim, so definitely be on the lookout for that if you need it. And I think I'm going to go fishing. So I'll see you later, I guess.
All right. Goodbye.